YouTube, what the crap's going on? Heir of Carthage here, and today we're going to take an Heir's faction-focused look at Macedon. Macedon's an interesting faction. They definitely have a lot of tools at their disposal, but unlike most of the successor kingdoms, they have no access to elephants, which kind of makes them in a little bit of a weaker position in some respects. But Macedon, like I said, does have tools of its own, which can be used interestingly. So let's take a look at Macedon as a faction. Here's your general availability. All of them are expensive, but each has their own bonuses. You look at the shield bearers, pretty good attack for a hoplite unit, and if you look at their armor, it's 105, on top of a 35 shield value, which is pretty high. They've got a base value of 70. So these guys are extremely heavily armored. They're going to be pretty resistant to missile fire. So definitely an interesting unit, and they're going to be able to hold off cav with a fury. Not elephants as easily. Potentially they could. They got a whole bunch of abilities. They got Hoplite Wall, Rapid Advance, which is pretty much not good for anything. Expert Charge Defense, which is actually fantastic. It helps elite hoplites stand up for longer against charging enemies. They're disciplined. They have Encourage, Formation Attack, and of course pretty much any unit can hide in the forest. So and they have Square Formation as well. A lot of things. I'm not going to recommend using this unit a lot because its uses are limited. But if you're really looking for a unit to kind of stay behind your infantry, inspire morale, and hold off for at least a little while against pretty much anything, this would be a good unit for that if you want your general there. It's a pretty safe spot for your general. Royal Peltist are a fantastic sword unit, really good. I think the only unit they would get beat by head-to-head would probably be Praetorian Guard. A really great sword unit, just got to be careful to keep them away from missile fire. They're not vulnerable to archers or slingers in particular, but they are going to be very vulnerable to javelins. The slingers would get a piece of them over prolonged time. Companion Cav is a pretty darn good shot cav. It's not fantastic, but it's pretty good. And it can deliver some pretty devastating blows on the charge, and it has pretty sturdy melee attack and other characteristics there. So also not a bad place to put your general, though it's probably a little risky because cav fights can either go your way or go against you pretty quick, and if your general gets killed early on, it can be bad. Foot Companions are a beastly, they are a beastly pike unit. I want to say Hellenic Royal Guard might be a little better, but I mean, Foot Companions can take down any infantry unit head on, period, end of story. Again, maybe with the exception of Hellenic Royal Guard. Let's take a look. Let's see, Hellenic Royal Guard are a little better. So just something to bear in mind. However, they are vulnerable to javelins and most missiles for that matter, including slingers. They'll resist archers a little longer, but they are vulnerable to missiles. But if you can get them into an infantry on infantry engagement from the front, these guys are going to beast. But again, price is kind of a factor with them. Alright, we move on to melee infantry. Not a whole lot of offerings, but considering that they're a Hellenic faction, they actually have access to 2 sword units, which isn't bad. One of them is a Thorax Swordsman. These guys really have pretty poor attack and melee characteristics, but they have good everything else, which means they can hold in a fight, and they can take down hoplite units usually, and they can do good at outflanking pikes and other stuff like that as far as being versatile and fairly resistant to missiles. Royal Peltis we've already discussed. As far as spear infantry goes, I like the offerings that Macedon has. They have cheap militia hoplites, Thurios spears, regular hoplites, and shield bearers, of course, which we discussed up here as well. Militia hoplites are a great unit to just spread thin in front of your lines to absorb enemy javelin fire and to keep their javelins out at a distance. In a melee fight, of course, these guys would destroy javelins, and they're not like extremely resistant to missiles, but for their price, they're pretty resistant to missile because they have a 35 shield value. And remember that in Rome 2, the shield basically presents, based on its value, a chance of completely blocking a missile attack. So that's something that to keep in mind. Let's take a look at the shield value on these other ones, see if any of them... Okay, so Thurios spears actually have less of a shield value. Interesting to know. Hoplites have the same 35, and then these guys have the same 35. So keep that in mind. Thurios spears slightly less shield value. Just in case you're ever worried about it, but you do get better attack statistics and stuff over the hoplite, the militia hoplite, that is. Let's see, pike infantry, you've got pretty much the whole works. You've got levy, regular, thorax, and foot companions. The levy pikemen probably come in the most handy because they're cost efficient, which allows you to bring one of these mini missile infantry units. Pikemen are pretty darn good, bang for the buck, but you got to be quite a bit more careful because of their price. If you think there's going to be an infantry engagement in which you're not worried about missiles, thorax pikemen are very, very deadly for their price, and then foot companions are just, like I said, against anything except the Hellenic Royal Guard head-to-head, they'll win. These guys will cut down Praetorians easily from the front. So just keep that in mind, though, that they are very vulnerable to missiles and rear charges and stuff like that, too. So let's take a look at missile infantry. You have everything from these crappy javelin men all the way up to these awesome mercenary Rhodian slingers. What are the benefit of these cheap units down here? Well, there could be numerous benefits. These cheap javelin men get pretty decent bang for their buck at such a price, and they're a great distraction unit or support unit. Even keeping one or two of these guys behind your life could make the difference between win and loss if it comes to elephants starting to get around your flank or infantry starting to get around your flank. So remember, the Macedonian style of warfare was to always have a main grand phalanx that would be supported by other units like companion cav, which would kind of act as the hammer for the army. Again, the phalanx was the anvil, and then you'd have support units like hoplite type units or missile type units like peltist. So in this case, cheap units like this can actually do a pretty good job of securing the flank of your phalanx. So for instance, if you start to get outflanked, these guys can hurl javelins and run. And if the enemy ignores you and goes to the back of your phalanx, they're going to get hit in the back with javelins. And the low cost helps them become more available. Same thing with the archers and the slingers. Slingers can be... These cheap slingers are really only good against an enemy that you think is going to bring archers. And don't be fooled. These slingers will probably be cost effective against expensive archers, but they're still going to die to them. These Cretan archers would kill these slingers. It's just that it wouldn't be a very good exchange for the Cretan archers. If these slingers went against these cheap archers, the slingers would destroy these archers. These archers can be good for taking down unarmored elephants, running them amok from a longer distance, delivering flaming shot onto enemies. Just stuff like that would be kind of what they could be good for. You have peltist here, which is a great level of armor. If you take a look at their armor, they got a 20 shield value and 35 base. They're going to be fairly missile resistant. They can move through enemy fire. I would recommend, though, instead of taking the peltist, you just go ahead and take the light peltist, which has the... Is it the same shield value? Yeah, same shield value. A little less armor, but you get way more ammo here at 12 ammo. And the Macedonian, the better javelin units like this have 10 armor piercing. These Thracian peltists actually don't have near as much armor, and they have a pretty poor shield value, but these guys have a painfully powerful missile attack. 45 is what they get, and they have 11 AP damage, which is very high. They do have the lower ammunition amount, but just keep in mind, if you think you can get these guys into a fight without them having to waste javelins on enemy targets like other skirmishers, if you can actually use these guys against infantry, these guys are infantry killers. Then you have Agrianian Axemen, which it lowers their missile damage a little. And let's see, armor piercing should be 10, it is. So you get a pretty darn good missile attack, and what you get is actually a melee option here, so you could throw your javelins and potentially put them into the flank of the enemy. They have good solid melee defense, decent armor and shield value, and decent health and morale. So these are kind of supposed to be like a combo unit. Then you got mercenary Cretan archers, which... well, these Cretan archers actually I think have... Oh no, never mind, I was on the wrong unit. Yeah, so mercenary Cretan archers have the highest bow attack in the game, I believe. And they have a pretty good armor piercing value once you turn on heavy shot. Pretty crappy before then, because you can see it's only 2. Not a whole lot of uses for these guys yet. It's kind of hard to make them be cost effective. However, if you were going to go against a faction like the Suebi, who have a lot of low armor units, these guys can rip them to pieces. Low armor units will get shredded by Cretan archers. So that's something to keep in mind. Rhodian Slingers, this is a fantastic unit for multiple uses. It can take heavy infantry head-on and still do some decent damage over time. Long range, it can beat down pretty much any other skirmisher in the game. They are expensive, which is their downside, but they do have a very good armor piercing value at 6 for a slinger, which is quite good. So these are some dangerous units. The only downside is that they're expensive. Shot cavalry, so Macedon has the cheapest shot cavalry in the game. With the Sarissa Cav at 400, these guys are not all that powerful, but they can deliver a pretty devastating charge, and they're fast. And they have the trample ability at that cost, which is really fantastic. Don't expect them to take other shot cav head-on, but they can damage melee cav pretty good, or infantry in charges, or get after enemy skirmishers. A lot of uses for them, I like them. The Thessalian Cav, same idea, just a little bit more expensive and a little tougher. I've already explained this unit with Epirus. They're the same one, and they're good, and we've already talked about Companion Cav. Citizen Cav is a great, just kind of run-of-the-mill melee Cav, and then Aspis is a very strong melee Cav. I can't find a whole lot of use for these guys yet at their cost. I'm kind of hoping that their cost gets changed in future patches, and then I think this would be a very interesting unit. They can kill enemy infantry. Like, you take these guys headlong into an Evocati cohort, and they will beat the Evocati cohort. The problem is it's just not real cost effective because of their absorbent cost. But an interesting unit. They will last forever in a cav fight if they don't get charged by shock cav, so that's something else to keep in mind. Just hard to make them cost effective. You got Skirmisher Cav, which is great, cheap way to tick off an enemy into attacking you. Mercenary Thracian Cav, which for some reason doesn't have 45 missile attack like their foot counterparts. I find that to be strange, but yeah, it's something that I wish they would address. It's got better stats if you wanted to use it as a combination light cav, but still kind of risky. And then they got Tarentine Cav, which is actually a pretty decent skirmisher cav because of that 20 shield value. Actually gives them quite a bit of protection from enemy missiles. I wonder what the shield value is on these guys. Same, actually. So both of these guys would do fairly well in the face of enemy missiles. The only difference in their field artillery is that they have access to the Greek Beehive Onager, which is nothing special, to be honest. Nothing to write home about. Let's go in and take a look at the replay that I made with Macedon. Where'd it go? Here it is. So, Macedon, I did this on the same map that I did the last one, so sorry if it's kind of washed out. Brought a Roman army with elephants here because typically a player is going to know that they have an elephant. They can use elephants to try and gain an advantage over Macedon since they don't have any. And it would help a Roman secure the cav fight or destroy any pikes that it could get into the flank of. I brought kind of a phalanx army here being supported by the units. Like I said, I've got Thurio spears and a whole bunch of archers, and then up front I'm running a couple of mercenary Thracian peltists, hoping to get some shots at Roman infantry. I'm just doing cheap shock cav supported by a companion cav over here. And then I got a two Thessalian cav and a Sarissa cav over here. Macedon definitely does have the advantage of being able to field a lot of shock cavalry. They're not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with people like Bactria very easy. But I mean, then again, who can? But Macedon's definitely a viable faction. Lots of tools at their disposal. I just brought these cheap archers because I was playing AI. Not necessarily highly recommended in online play, but you know what? Sometimes these guys find a use. Like in this case, I think I did bring them actually to help against the Roman elephants. What's really funny is if you ever play against the AI on certain settings, if you run their elephants amok, the AI will actually use the kill elephants ability. Now here I'm letting my mercenary Thracian peltist hit the velites. In a real battle I wouldn't want to do this because that's not a good cost engagement, or not a good cost-effective way to use them because these velites are relatively cheap. I should be focusing on other infantry units. Anyway, watch these elephants coming this way. They're making their way up my flank, and again I'm just leaving a stationary spear unit on my flank. A real player could try to outflank, but they know that they're also going to get hit with a lot of missiles, and then here comes the flaming missile attack, I believe. We'll see how fast it works. Yeah, you see archers have some trouble getting a lot of shots off quickly. Check this out. All the elephants just died. I'm pretty sure that they ran amok and that the AI instantly hit the kill button. Of course, the AI will charge your pikes head on, but you can see that even in a real situation, what your opponent is going to have to do, so you've set up a defensive line, say with someone like Macedon, so they can't attack head on unless they have a missile advantage, which, you know, in this case they wouldn't have. So they're going to have to start trying to work your flanks. And the reason I like this type of setup is that you can just kind of leave one or two pikes in the center to hold, and you can just start to fold back your flanks. So like for instance, you could fold back here and just make it difficult for your opponent to outflank. And then of course you could reposition your skirmishers right behind those lines. And typically it's a good idea to keep some unit, like for instance I could have put my general in a shield bearer and they could have then protected this one last gap. That's kind of spear boxy, but you know what, when you're using pikes, if you can't force your enemy to engage, they're not going to do a lot of good. These are just standard pikemen easily taking down an Evocati cohort. Levy pikemen here in the center, easily standing against legionnaires and an Evocati. Over here where they've attacked my foot companions, the foot companions have only taken losses because of the enemy velites, but they are easily chopping down these Roman legionnaires. It's just that whenever pikes attack something head-on, unless that unit has low armor, they're not going to die fast, but they'll be fixed and they won't really do any damage. You can see the Romans pretty easily get beaten back. This Levy pikeman they eventually did muscle through, so that's something to be aware of. Levy pikemen can get muscled through. use my Sarissa Cav, which did almost no damage, but to just try and pin these guys, and now all my archers and javelins can work their magic on these Romans, who have their flank exposed on the non-shield side too. Archers firing into the non-shield side of a unit will actually be somewhat effective, and you can see that I got a lot of kills. Yeah, so anyway, the Macedonians are good at setting up a front, being able to zone out enemy units, and then their shock cav can deliver powerful rear blows like this. You can see that when pinned against the front of a phalanx, the rear blows are actually quite effective, more so than in most situations. And that was a Thessalian cav, that wasn't even a companion cav. So yeah, kind of an idea on how to use Macedon. I'd say you pretty much use them kind of like Alexander did in real life. Your phalanx is there to hold folks, and the rest of your army is there for supporting and aggressor means, basically. And take a look at that. The mercenary Thracian Peltas did get a lot of kills. Even some of my archers managed to get a few kills there. Massed archer fire against a cheap javelin unit like Velites will take them out, and these guys are relatively cheap, but, I mean, there's different uses, and you saw how quick I was able to run the enemy elephants amok. Of course, the Romans are stupid and chiseled their elephants when they might have actually run into my lines, but, you know, whatever. They can be used to run an elephant amok, or you can just leave them off a flaming shot. If it's an armored unit, you may want to consider running it amok, because there's a chance it'll go back into the enemy. If it's an unarmored unit of elephants, you may want to just consider shooting normal shot at it, because you don't really need a lot of armor piercing versus the normal elephants, and you'll go ahead and start to do more hit point damage. So what factions can Macedon stand on its own against? I think they could stand against pretty much any faction head-to-head, depending on how you use them and how your opponent uses their faction. They're not a power faction, but they're pretty close because of their infantry and skirmishers. They just lack elephants or chariots when it comes to being a power faction. So they're definitely a good faction, and they're going to be good at many things. So just consider that when you decide to use them. So I won't necessarily recommend anybody in particular. Well, I guess I can name it. They're a fun matchup against Rome. They're also a pretty fun matchup against Pontus. And I like taking them from time to time against Bactria, Egypt, and Seleucids as well. So even though they're not quite as powerful, it provides a fun challenge. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this. Heir of Carthage, signing off for now.